afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Gazzillo of the UMassSafe Traffic Safety Research Program at the UMass Transportation Center. We really appreciate you making the time to be here today. We know summer schedules can be tough between vacations and all the other deadlines you all are juggling. We're going to keep today really brief and useful. Today's webinar is part of the CV-STAC Commercial Vehicle Safety Technical Assistance Center Summer Webinar Series, and it's a convening of the Eastern Service Center CMV Safety Data Collaborative. So we want to share what recent UMassSafe research has shown and get some initial reactions and have you help point us in the right direction. Research can often take too long to reach implementation, and this gives us a faster way to share what we're learning, hear what we might be missing, and move ideas forward. The range of experience in this audience is really broad. As I scroll through the list of attendees, thank you all so much for being here. So we really think we can get good tidbits of information from each of you in your specific expertises and help fill in these cracks and identify the most promising strategies and begin developing these action steps to move commercial motor vehicle work zone safety forward. So I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Dr. Cole Fitzpatrick, an associate research professor at UMass Amherst and within the UMass Transportation Center. Cole's going to share his findings from an FHWA-funded Northeast Work Zone Safety Improvement Plan, or NEWZSIP, along with a regional analysis that was done of fatal work zone crashes involving commercial motor vehicles across the Eastern Service Center. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cole.
All right, thank you, Jen. All right, so there are my slides. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your afternoon to join us here. So as Jen mentioned, I'm going to be talking about two projects that have kind of complementary to each other. So this is the Northeast Collaboration to Optimize Work Zone Safety Guidelines as part of our FMCSA grant. Just real quick, we're obligated to mention the two disclaimers. So this was supported by an FMCSA grant as well as an FHWA grant. The material was produced by us here at UMass Amherst and does not represent necessarily the beliefs of those two organizations or the U.S. government. All right, so for those of you not familiar with UMassSafe, we are a small research group housed within the College of Engineering and then Civil and Environmental Engineering at UMass. We combine data-driven problem identification with traditional highway safety practices. As Jen mentioned, we're going to be talking about the combination of two complementary projects. So the one that I've been working most closely on is we're calling NEWZSIP, or the Northeast Work Zone Safety Improvement Plan. That is the FHWA grant that covers 9 Northeast states. And that had many components. So we did key informant interviews with various DOT personnel, a regional crash data analysis looking at every state, and then a driver experience survey where we reached out to drivers in the region, both CDL and non-CDL drivers, to get their beliefs and attitudes on various work zone implementations or countermeasures. And then this is all coming together for an improvement plan, webinars such as these, and then we have a project website, which I'll mention at the end of this presentation. And then we're combining this with the Eastern Service Center CMV Work Zone Analysis. So this brings in a few additional states within the Eastern Service Center. It's looking at kind of a broader scope of fatal CMV crashes, also bringing in MCMIS data. So that's the Motor Carrier Management Information System, I believe. I'm sure I'm butchering that acronym, but also looking at violation and inspection data. And we're building a dashboard to plot work zone fatal crashes, and then also looking at state by state and seeing if we can see anything interesting there. But overall, these come together to kind of the same overarching question of, what are the problems in our work zones, specifically related to CMVs, and what can we do differently to reduce the incidence of fatal and serious crashes? So here's the scope for the FHWA problem. Our project. So we have the New England states plus New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And we spoke with DOT personnel, but it's also of note to law enforcement researchers, people who work on the roadside, anyone involved with work zones, basically. As part of this project, we developed state data sheets So for each of our 9 states, we developed a data sheet that looks something like this. The top 2/3 is FARS data, which is consistent across every state. And then the bottom part is non-fatal information, which really varied state from state or state by state. And I can talk about that a little bit later. But getting into the truck and bus problem in work zones specifically, we kind of had 2 key findings. So one, CMVs are highly overrepresented in fatal work zone crashes. So you can see across our 9 states here, the share of CMVs in work zone crashes was, 20% on the low end, 50% on the high end. But in all fatal crashes, CMVs only make up, 7 to 15%. So when there is a work zone fatal, CMVs are more likely to be involved. And then similar, the type of crash is a rear end into a work zone queue. So this graph here, so the blue bars show the percentage of crashes that are basically rear end in work zones. And then the gray bars are the percentage of rear end that are in all fatal crashes. So when there is a work zone crash, it's highly likely that it's a rear end collision. All right, moving on here. So we also conducted a really thorough state of the practice, or state of the practice. So we conducted 10 interviews with 16 DOT or similar staff members, and we asked them, we had hour-long interviews talking about all these different things, trying to understand what they're doing in their states regarding work zone safety, what challenges they have, what trainings they implement, kind of and all that. And that led to a matrix which nobody can read. That's totally fine. I have a better representation of this. But basically, it was a 9 by, I want to say, 11 matrix showing what each state is doing in all these different categories. And this led to a state of the practice report that details all of this. And at the end of this presentation, I'll share how this can be accessed by everyone on this webinar so you can learn more. Talking about what the DOTs told us, enforcement was a big part of it, and specifically speed safety cameras. So that's been a big theme, I guess, in the region and maybe nationally over the past couple of years. So Pennsylvania in the Northeast is probably the leader here. So in 2019, they started a pilot, and then they've really seen a lot of success with that. So their work zone crashes are down 33% from 2018 to 2023. Connecticut, similar, they started a pilot and they now made their program permanent. New York is in the middle of a pilot. Vermont is starting one. Maine, Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island, I believe all would like speed safety cameras. And then New Hampshire, New Jersey, they still prohibit. But yeah, and some of the reports that they've put out are really sobering, really. Like New York saw speeds of 139 miles per hour as one of their top ends. Connecticut saw 120. So this just kind of shows the speed issues that occur. Some of the practices that the states are doing or some of the challenges they're having. So Maine and Vermont, for example, cited challenges with providing alternate routes for heavy trucks. So, if they shut down a section of interstate up in rural Vermont or Maine, and maybe New Hampshire deals with this as well, there's really not good detour routes necessarily. So they mentioned that as a big challenge. A lot of states are using attenuator trucks. So these are basically trucks that they park in front of workers. I believe it was New York said these are great, but they keep getting hit all the time and they're very expensive. So that's a challenge. But there's a lot of different technology that the states are using. So there's discussion of smart vests. So the workers would wear a vest that would start vibrating if a work zone incursion was detected. Some states are using automated flaggers. So instead of having someone, standing on its side of the road holding a flag, it's a gate that goes up and down. And then we also talked about training. So all the states do flagger training, and they have other trainings as well. All right, so getting into the Eastern Service Center crash data more specifically. So across 2020 to 2024, there were 135 fatal work zone CMV crashes, 147 total deaths in those, and just about 5% or 1 in 21 fatal CMV crashes occurred in a work zone. A big gap we found in our data analysis is that MCMIS, so MCMIS contains crash data for every CMV, both fatal and non-fatal. MCMIS unfortunately has no work zone field, so we're unable to quantify the work zone safety problem uh, outside of just fatal crashes. So we're only able to look at fatal crashes. It would be great if we could also look at non-fatals with MCMIS data. Getting into some of the specifics, so 63% of these fatal crashes occurred on interstates. 38.5% were rear end crashes into stopped or slowed traffic. 50% were classified as construction zones. So I'll describe what that means in a few slides here. 18 crashes killed a roadside worker tragically. 20% involved a driver without a valid CDL. So in FARS, there's a data field about driver license status. So 20% of drivers did not have a valid CDL. And then 8 involved a bus, and the rest were large trucks. So as I've said a couple times, so the dominant pattern is the queue crash. So you have a heavy vehicle running into the back of a slowed queue. And then where these crashes were occurring. So this just shows all the states in the Eastern Service Center. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands were not on here because they did not have any work zone fatals. Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York were the top 3. Some of that matches in population, right? And then getting into the trends. So, like many issues in work zone safety, things kind of spiked in 2021 and have declined somewhat since then. 63% on interstate, 64% in urban, and then a large percentage in dark conditions as well, which all kind of tracks with where CMVs drive and when they drive. And then getting back to the work zone classification. So in FARS, they're classified either as a construction work zone, a maintenance, a utility, but unfortunately, there's a large percentage that had an unknown classification as well. Getting into the crash types, as I've said, rear end into stopped or slowed traffic was a large percent. The other large percentage was a single vehicle crash, where either they drifted into a closed lane, into the shoulder, ran off the road, or they struck a person along the roadside. And then angle, sideswipe, and head-on also exist as somewhat frequent crash or manner of collisions. All right, some more stats here. So 18 of the 35 or 135 crashes killed a roadside worker. We confirm this by looking at news stories. I'll get to that in a second. And then 27 crashes involved a truck or bus driver without a valid CDL. And then as I started to allude to, so we're in the process of building a dashboard for the Eastern Service Center that shows all the fatal CMV work zone crashes. So you can explore the dashboard, and then you can actually zoom in, click on a dot, and you'll see news articles associated with each crash. So we've been able to attach news coverage to 100 out of the 135 fatal crashes, 313 articles total. We're still going through and fact checking and making sure that they all align perfectly. But then there will be filters, so you can filter to the ones where there was not a valid CDL or where there was a roadside worker that was killed, bus involved, etc. So I think this will be an interesting tool to look at and to kind of drill down and kind of explore each fatal crash. And then we're also working on kind of state by state snapshots of um, state level inspection data and fatal crash information for work zones. One thing that we've started to see with the inspection data that's kind of interesting is West Virginia specifically is doing a lot of work zone speed enforcement. Um, Maybe the other states are, and they're just not making it into this data set. But looking at this work zone violation field, West Virginia is kind of the outlier in utilizing that field. And then we're also looking statewide or state by state, the inspection type. So whether it's a driver only inspection, walk around, all that, and the violations that result from those inspections. All right, so moving on, this is back to the FHWA project a little bit. So we did administered a driver experience survey. So we solicited responses mainly on Facebook. Um, and in total, we got about 1,300 responses. It looked something like this. So some example questions. So on your typical one-way trip, if you knew in advance of a work zone, how much delay would there have to be for you to shift your route? How do you get your work zone information? And then we showed a bunch of work zone countermeasures and then asked how effective do you think these are at getting you to slow down if you saw them? Just getting into our demographics a little bit. We had respondents from all over the Northeast, a lot from Massachusetts, a lot from New York, a lot from Pennsylvania, but we tried to get a representative sample from every Northeast state. So some of the perceived effectiveness of various countermeasures. So by far the most effective that people said was workers actively being present. So people were more likely to slow down if they saw active workers or if they saw heavy equipment operating or flaggers, right? So and then these went down all the way. Speed safety camera signage and the presence of speed safety cameras was also deemed as highly effective. And then maybe the least effective, but we're still obligated to put them out, were signs that warn of penalties. So, double fines occur in work zones. We also asked, or as part of this, we compared state by state. So what states rated these countermeasures more effective? What states rated these countermeasures less effective? I'm not going to go through all of these here. I want to kind of hone in on some of the CDL specific findings. So as part of this survey, we asked if they were a CDL driver or a non-CDL driver. The CDL drivers responded more positively to penalty signs. So they said they were more likely to slow for penalty signs. They responded more strongly to speed safety cameras, whether heavy equipment was visible. They were also more likely to get navigation alerts, or if they knew inactive work was happening, they were more likely to slow down. And kind of interesting, and people are maybe nodding their head in front of their computer here. CDL drivers were more skeptical of other drivers. So the question was, most drivers try to reduce their speed in work zones, and CDL drivers did not agree with this statement because they're the ones out there driving every day and seeing what other drivers are doing around them. They did not agree that drivers try to reduce their speeds in work zones. And another belief or feeling they had also is they were more willing to slow down in a work zone than non-CDL drivers. As part of the survey, we also asked how they get their work zone information. So there's a whole range of options here. So, Google Maps was, I think, number one. It varied a little bit state by state. So Vermont, for example, has a strong 511 system, as does Pennsylvania. Um, we also asked about trucker path, which I'm not too familiar with, but I assume it's a way for CDL drivers to get specific truck information. Um, and then what was interesting at the end of the survey is we basically said, tell us whatever you want to tell us. And we ended up getting 383 free form responses. And the number one theme was enforcement. So some examples here. So um, the police details never moved from their spot. I'm not concerned about getting a ticket. I'd like to see more police presence. More and more cars and trucks are driving at high speeds. And then, flaggers with clearly signed slow stop flip signs seems to be the most communicative method. So, a lot of discussion about enforcement. I kind of summarized it here. The number two response was mentioning unsafe driver behaviors, so speeding, distraction, tailgating, etc. And then a lot of people complained also about stale or misleading signs. So a big frustration was that there was signage about a work zone ahead, or maybe even there was a reduced speed limit, but there was no active work going on. So that was a big frustration. Some of our kind of overarching conclusions from both of these, it's the queue crash. So I guess we need to look into who's at fault in the queue crash and who's being fatally injured in those crashes. Overall, CMVs are overrepresented in fatal work zone crashes. Uh, New Jersey, specifically in their CVSP, treats work zones as an emphasis area for CMVs. Um, I know Massachusetts, not specific to CMVs necessarily, but also uh, treated work zones as an emphasis area. Enforcement works when it's credible. So a lot of people call the details effective, but they complain that they complain that the enforcement wasn't actually taking place, even though the police were present. And the speed safety camera program across all the states appears to be highly effective at reducing crashes in work zones. And then lastly, so the data. So MCMIS not having a work zone field really limits our ability to look at the data outside of fatal crashes. And that exists at the state scale as well. So going through the data in the 9 northeastern states, I want to say only 2 or 3, maybe 4 of them had a work zone classification in their publicly available data. So it's tough to quantify the problem if the data isn't available. And then some of the themes we're working on. So as part of the FHWA project, we're coming up with a work zone safety improvement plan. Here's just kind of a handful of our proposed emphasis areas. So, you know, temporary traffic control consistency. So if there's actively work happening, then the signage should represent that. If there's not active work, then try and take down the signs, right? Driver behavior and speed management, it's maybe the biggest issue. So getting people to slow down, getting people off their phones, protecting the workers. Additional technology around worker visibility and protection, whether that's attenuated trucks or some of the technology I mentioned earlier in the presentation, improving the data, which I just spoke about, and then enforcement speed safety cameras. So bringing kind of the Pennsylvania, Connecticut type model to more states within the region. And then getting information out there about communication. So where are the work zones actively happening? I didn't mention this, but WZDX, so that's the work zone data exchange. So states can plug into this, which then distributes the information to the Waze and Google Maps and all that, so that the information is real in live time. And then for the safety data collaborative, so targeting the queue crash. So we got some work to do on our end, digging into whether it's the CMV or the passenger vehicle. And then doing some more investigation into the CDL gap. So 1 in 5 fatal work zone crashes, there was not a valid CDL present. So is that a licensing issue? Is it an enforcement? So digging into that. Um, Making work zones more of an emphasis in state CVSPs would be great. Addressing data and then using kind of the process evidence base that we built here. So a state by state approach, looking at notable practices in all the states, coming up with a work zone improvement plan, states talking to each other, right? Not reinventing the wheel every time, would be great. And then the last thing I'll highlight before maybe taking some questions. Hopefully, it's looking like I went way too fast here, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. But as part of the FHWA project, we developed this website, so newzip.umasssafe.org. So you can explore the crash data analysis that I mentioned at the onset, the state of the practice, so that big matrix that was unreadable, you can explore all the findings from that. That's in the state of the practice explorer here. The crash data analysis that I mentioned. And lastly, if you have input, so if you go through all this, or if you even have input on today's presentation, you can drop it into this website. We'll read it and it'll inform our future work. It'll inform the safety improvement plan. I guess thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.